In this video, we're discussing a standard that is very important. I think it's one that gets tested quite frequently, and some people have a problem with it or the questions that get asked about it. So we're going to spend a few minutes discussing independence and objectivity, that standard 1B. Professionalism, under the professionalism, the wider professionalism standard. Okay, well, the message is that we should strive to maintain, do what is possible, reasonably possible, to maintain independence and objectivity, especially when performing research and giving recommendations or picking a solution. And another aspect of this is that we must not either offer or expect to receive, try to solicit, try to get from others, induce them to give us, or accept gifts or some compensation, some forms of compensation. But it's not like you shouldn't accept gifts. If you work in the finance industry, that's not it. Gifts that, and this is going to be important, reasonably could be expected, right, to compromise our independence and objectivity, or the independence and objectivity of others. So to compromise, to have an impact, a negative impact on independence and objectivity, either our own, if we're going to, accept a gift, or others, if we are offering others some gifts. Now, this is really important. This reasonably could be expected, because it's not really about whether you will be affected by a gift, and you may think for your own purposes, no, I'm fine, I can accept a gift and still be independent and objective in my work. It's what others may expect, or the perception of others. They may think your independence and objectivity has been compromised, and that's why you shouldn't accept it, even if you think you're okay. You're not going to be in any way tainted or biased because somebody is giving you a gift. Right. Now, the way this typically gets framed, let's say, or the setup, well, there are a few possibilities, but typically the protagonist in an example or a question will be an analyst working on the so-called sell side. So a sell-side analyst, think about, a sell-side analyst as somebody who typically works for a bank. They could be working for a brokerage firm, and they're supposed to issue research or write research, objective research about companies, right, who issue stocks, bonds, etc. And that analyst, with their research, the research is typically, the conclusion of the research is that one should buy, accumulate, hold, or sell stocks or sell securities. Now, that research, typically, which they produce, is mainly read by funds or fund managers, obviously other clients as well, but funds who are the buy side in the market. And of course, because these buy side clients, these funds already hold portfolios of securities, if the research is negative, as it sometimes should be, of course, that would have a negative impact on the value of the portfolios held by the funds, assuming they already hold these securities. So one source of pressure that the analyst may be subject to is pressure from these fund managers, from the investment managers. Obviously, pressure to produce positive research so as to help their portfolio values. And obviously, this is this this type of pressure is unacceptable. So if you're a fund manager, you shouldn't try to apply pressure on an analyst who's supposed to be objective, right, to skew and bias their conclusions. And in the same way, if you're an analyst and you're being subjected to this pressure, I mean, you shouldn't heed to it. You should try to be still maintain your independence and objectivity, of course. Right. Another source of pressure. So let's say you're working in a brokerage team, issuing lots of research, but there's also the investment bankers, the investment banking team within your company, within your sort of bank. And these are, of course, the people who advise clients and help clients, especially sort of big corporations, issue shares and bonds. So that's what they do. They underwrite share offerings. They get hired. And once again, in order to build a relationship with potential issuers, they may apply pressure on analysts to, once again, pressure for positive research, to make that research positive. Because if you are pitching your services to a client, your investment banking services to a client, a company who's about to issue something like bonds or shares, you probably don't want your research analyst to be issuing negative research about them. So, for positive research. And that's a very natural thing. Now, once again, the analyst should not yield to that, but there's a way to avoid that conflict, and it's called a restricted list that I'll talk about in a moment's time. And another source of pressure still, right, on that analyst producing the research is pressure from the company that this research is supposed to be about, so the issuer of the securities. Right, they will also, I guess, have an interest in the research report being positive, because that helps their stock price stay high, and that helps people get bonuses, etc. So they don't want that research to be negative, and they'll be, potentially trying to inflict or exert pressure on the analyst to make that research, favorable. Once again, the analyst should be blind and deaf to such pressures, but it's very difficult. Now, one thing your book actually discusses quite a lot is the existence or the concept of something called issuer paid research, and how this makes the potential for conflict of interest even higher. So normally, the classic way in which sell-side research is produced is that banks will have a team of analysts, and those analysts will be paid to produce research reports on companies, do valuations, do fundamental sort of analysis, and the result of that is a research report, something that we also discussed in the equity section of the curriculum. However, given pressure, these analysts, they do not directly generate any revenue for the bank, because the research is a sort of added service, or the access to research is an added bonus for clients who use that bank's intermediation services. If you trade via us, via our brokers, dealers, you'll get access to research produced by our analysts, and many clients are sort of drawn to specific banks as their gateway to the market. You could choose any bank. Most banks have a team of brokers and dealers, so people who are in the market or giving you access to the market, but you may be tempted to use the services of a specific institution because of the high quality of their analytical team, their research. So, however, those people writing the reports, they don't produce sort of directly revenue. They're a bit of a sort of nice to have kind of thing. And banks are under extreme pressure these days, especially from non-banking companies who also provide sort of broker stroke dealer services. And they need to reduce, or they're under pressure to reduce costs. Hence, they've been limiting their research teams, their analytical teams. It's no longer a luxury one can really easily afford. So the amount of research coverage, or the coverage of that research done by the analytical teams, is getting smaller and smaller. They can't cover all the companies in the market. So some companies, which are below sort of the threshold, find it necessary to actually pay an independent analyst to do research on the business, because banks, they're not big enough for banks to take an interest. So this is supposed to be done by an independent analyst. And the problem here is, of course, that a company that pays an independent analyst to do research on them may, to a greater even extent, right, exert pressure and expect that the result of that research will be positive, or the conclusions from that research will be positive. Now the thing is, the analyst should never ever accept such an agreement where the compensation would be contingent, so based on the outcome of the research. So compensation cannot be contingent on the conclusions of that research report. Because that obviously induces the analyst to write something positive about the company, or at least less negative. And even if they're extremely moral and they would never be skewed, the fact that such an agreement is in place may be, but if others knew about it, would probably be perceived as potentially generating conflict of interest. So you should avoid it in the first place. Just work for a flat fee, and flat fee only arrangements are the way to go in such situations. Okay. Now, if you are writing research about a company, now it doesn't matter whether it's paid for by the issuer, or maybe you're working for a bank that's no, take that back. If the issuer pays for the research, yeah, they will typically cover your costs of travel, etc., lodgings, and so on. But if you're a sell-side analyst working for a bank, let's say, and you're doing independent research on companies, and obviously part of your research may involve traveling to the location of the company to visit the facilities, talk to management, etc., use commercial transport. Use commercial transport, and whenever possible, also use normal sort of accommodation, and pay for yourself. In the sense that let your employer pay for the accommodation and the travel. Don't let the company on whom you're doing research pay for that, because that will once again create a conflict of interest situation. If commercial transport is not available, as sometimes if you've got to travel to a remote location because that's where the company is based, or that's where their facilities are based, well, only then can you allow the issuer to pay for you. But if they're also agreeing to pay for accommodation, perhaps, it has to be modest. So if not available, just agree, as in commercial travel wouldn't be available, agree to modest travel stroke lodgings arranged by the issuer. And there are questions in the book that kind of test this, or examples in the book that test this, and it's an often sort of cited type of question by candidates. Right, the same here, the same sort of conflict of interest situation potentially also applies to employees working at credit rating agencies, credit rating agency analysts, and obviously if you work for a credit rating agency, you don't generate or write reports or issue credit ratings for free. That service is paid for by the client, by the company who's the issuer of securities, like, especially bonds, right? So they pay to be rated. And once again, there may be pressure applied because we've chosen your agency to do the rating, right? There may be pressure for a positive rating. Well, once again, that has to be absolutely avoided. And another type of pressure-generating relationship that your book mentions or talks about is when you manage a fund, right? You don't do everything independently on your own, etc. You often have to select service providers to do your, custody services. So you have to select a custodian bank to hold your assets or whatever. You have to select, a company that will. You have to select a broker via whom you'll trade. Now, you're the client here, right? And they're the service providers. And once again, when choosing the provider of, a third party to provide some essential service, you should not accept any gifts or benefits that would skew or could be viewed as skewing your choice. And if you work on the other side, you should not give such gifts or benefits to the decision maker. And the same thing applies, and there are questions on this. For example, if you're running a pension fund or some, quite complicated fund, and you're not an expert on everything, of course, you typically need to select additional sort of third-party asset managers to whom you will allocate parts of the portfolio for them to manage on your behalf. And once again, selecting the asset manager who will, for example, run the real estate part of your portfolio or the bond part of your portfolio shouldn't be ever influenced by gifts or benefits that those people may want to give you, right? Or they may, it doesn't even have to be direct. Your book talks about potentially them luring you or incentivizing you by, the promise of donations to your favorite charity or, some political cause like a political party. Well, that's also bad, right? Avoid that. It doesn't, even if you're not receiving this yourself, you should never accept this. So, just like before, I'm going to talk about in the previous video, that is, I'm going to just mention some of the recommended procedures which should help us sort of stay in line with this independence and objectivity standard. But I'm not going to discuss the obvious ones, the most obvious one is protect the integrity of individual opinions, right? So inside a firm, foster a culture where that independence is, valued, and make sure that policies are in place so that analysts are not subjected to this, or the exposure to such pressure would be limited. And, of course, make sure your compensation policies do not reward people differently depending on whether their research reports are positive or negative. I mean, that's quite obvious. But what isn't quite obvious, and I did mention it, is create a restricted list. So if this is especially important for banks who are also doing investment banking. So they're trying to attract customers who will choose that bank to help them issue stocks or bonds. And if you want to avoid a situation where simultaneously you're pitching for business from such a client, investment banking client, or you've already been selected, so you're kind of going to promote their bonds or shares, but at the same time you've got analysts who are supposed to produce independent research, and you don't want a situation where there's going to be unfavorable research about a company for whom you're working under an investment banking mandate, then put them on a restricted list. That means for a certain period of time, we're not going to publish any research about that client specifically, and and it's not something you have to be secretive about. No, people will understand. It's because you represent the same institution, or the same bank is representing that client under an investment banking mandate. So they've limited their publication of research reports, or they've stopped it or temporarily halted. And that's absolutely fine. That means you won't have a conflict of interest. You may still publish some info, but you'll limit this to sort of factual information only instead of giving recommendations. Of course, another thing which is quite obvious, right, is limiting gifts. Although, don't go over the top. It's not as if you can't accept any gift. Now, there is a nice example in the book also when a gift is even a pretty lavish one is quite acceptable. I'll talk about that in a moment. But sometimes in business, certain gifts are just customary and part of the game. For example, at around year end, let's say Christmas time, if we're talking about a country that celebrates where Christmas is celebrated, it's customary for people from different companies within the same industry to send each other a small sort of token gift. Nothing lavish, whatever is accepted, that's fine, as long as the purpose of that is not to influence others, just to show maybe show some sympathy, show positive feelings, and I guess, I don't know, a moderately priced little gift, token gift, just to show appreciation is absolutely fine. So we shouldn't go over the top. Okay, now on to the really, really important stuff. That's the examples. And like I did in the previous video, and before I get to the examples, let me tell you that there's a lot more stuff on that recommended procedures list, but most of them are so obvious, I mean, you don't really have to listen to me talking about them. They're just self-explanatory, and pretty much what I discussed previously in the conflicts of interest setup is I've already mentioned a lot of the stuff we have to avoid. Now, the really critical things are the application of the standard, and like in the previous video, I want you to go through all the examples, right, which are under this sort of section, application of the standard. Some of them are really, really simple, like really obvious, where they just show instances pretty much of that pressure being applied, either pressure from within the company, from an issuer, from investment banking team, etc., or an analyst will now start covering a company, doing research on them, and the analyst that previously was doing the research, passes on the paperwork, the files, but says, I expect you to continue upholding a positive recommendation. Well, of course, that's unacceptable sort of pressure, and the new analysts should just do their own independent, objective work and form their own basis for their conclusions. So lots of this is really, really simple. I just want to focus on literally two or three examples, to be honest. There is a nice one. It's example 1, and this is one of the most iconic examples. People who've already studied a bit of ethics will know this one. It's about travel expenses. And this is a situation where analysts who are supposed to be covering a company get invited to a tour of the facilities, but so travel is involved, but unfortunately it's in such a remote location, or it involves so much hopping about. It's quite an intensive itinerary, I guess. Yeah, there's so much travel involved to go from one location to another that the company decided just to charter a flight for those analysts so as to make it smoother. Now, chartered flight paid for by the issuer plus some modest accommodation, and it's modest because they tell you, and the hotel is called Spartan Hotels. This is something you'll remember for life, I think. When I took my CFA exams 15 years ago, that example was there already. So now the thing is, ideally, as an analyst, you should get your company to pay for for commercial travel and for the hotel. But they say if it's not really feasible to arrange, if commercial travel wouldn't be possible to do that itinerary, then accept it. Yeah, accept the fact that the issuer is paying for it. And you may also accept this modest accommodation, although they say, well, in this example, or in this little case, there is another employee of another company, John Adams, who insists that he shall pay for his room himself, and that's even better. So what Adams is doing is even better, but accepting modest accommodation probably is not. They say it's not necessarily violating Standard 1B. So you could go the extra step, but don't hire your own plane and fly behind the chartered plane just to pay for it yourself. That's a bit stupid. That's over the top. You have to catch the gist of it, the balance. It's not necessarily easy. Now, another example which I find really interesting is example 7 and then example 8, because these two examples are about gifts, and people often get this gift situation a bit wrong, or like they don't appreciate subtle differences. So example 7 talks about a fund manager and their selection of a broker. And a broker is somebody via whose intermediation services you use when buying securities and selling securities, of course. So the fund manager in this relationship is a client, and this is a service provider. And, the broker makes money from the fund manager passing trades to them. And it's unacceptable to accept a gift from the broker, especially if it's not a token gift like, thank you for being our client. It's a lavish gift. It's, let me just check what it was, because I get confused about these gifts. Yes, it's 2 tickets to the World Cup, which is, and 2 nights at a nearby resort. That's a lavish gift. It's not a token gift that would just give to one another in the industry, and this is not acceptable, right? Because it's going to absolutely taint the objectivity of the fund manager and their independence when selecting a service provider for the next year, let's say. And that they say here, grant. So the protagonist fails to disclose receiving this package to his supervisor. Well, irrespective of whether he discloses it or not, he shouldn't have accepted it in the first place. But then, following example 7, there is example 8, and please, before I say anything, read this example yourself in the material. Read it and have a look. And see what you think about it, and I'll say a few words about it. Okay. So hopefully you've seen it. And this one is also about a fund manager or an asset manager. But this time, a client over here. So the situation is the fund manager looks after a client's money, or an asset manager, manages the portfolio of some client. So let's say this is not even a fund manager; it's an asset manager. So they're looking after a wealthy client's portfolio, and they've managed to generate a good return. And this client is so happy with the return that they've decided to give a pretty expensive, lavish gift to the asset manager, a specific person working for the asset management firm. But this is in recognition of how, pleased they are with the service being provided, with the performance. And this is a completely different situation. In fact, this is looking at it okay, because it's not that you shouldn't, as a person in finance, accept gifts. It's whether you can accept a gift or that you shouldn't accept gifts that can impede your objectivity and independence. Here, the gift is going the other way. It's not going from service provider to client, like in the previous case. It's going from client to service provider as a sort of thank you. And that's a completely different setup. And hopefully you feel that the direction of the flow of the gift is okay. Is absolutely makes this absolutely fine. The only thing that should happen is Teresa Green, who's the asset manager, should report this to her employer, which I'm not sure if she's done or not. No, Green discloses, yes, this gift to her supervisor, so she discloses it because it's now the job of the supervisor to check if potentially receiving this gift will not make that specific asset manager, that person, Teresa Green, a bit more favorable to the client who award this gift. This is an extra, and it shouldn't sort of make Teresa Green work harder for this client as opposed to other clients. But as long as there is no detriment to sort of other clients of the company, it's fine to accept such a gift unless your employer says, please don't do it. Yeah, but not every gift will impact one's objectivity or independence. So it's not okay to solicit It's not okay if a fund manager accepts a gift so that they choose this broker above others, because here they're supposed to be looking for the best quality of service, the best fees, etc. for their client. But it's absolutely okay if a fund manager receives a gift from a client who's happy with the work they're doing. Important distinction. Now, the other examples are pretty straightforward. There isn't really anything there that surprises me or should surprise you, but absolutely go through all of those examples, make sure you're okay with them, and see you in the next video.